Hello everyone, and welcome back to Learning Upgraded. Today, we're focusing on the initiation phase of project management. You might be wondering, what does baking a cake have to do with project management? Well, baking a cake is a project in itself. It requires planning, organizing, and executing, much like any other project. Now think of project management as the recipe for baking that cake. It outlines the steps you need to take, the resources you need, and the order in which everything needs to happen to achieve your end goal, a delicious, mouth-watering cake. In the same way, project management guides us on how to successfully complete a project, be it launching a new product, organizing a conference, or building a website. And the first step in this process is the initiation phase, where we decide on the type of cake we're making and gather our ingredients. So grab your aprons and get ready to dive in. Before we dive into the initiation phase, let's quickly run through what project management is all about. Imagine that you're about to bake a cake. You wouldn't just start throwing ingredients into a bowl, would you? No, you'd follow a recipe, a plan that guides you step by step, from preheating the oven to taking a bite out of a delicious slice of your creation. That's project management, a systematic approach to accomplish a specific goal, whether it's baking a cake or building a skyscraper. Now let's consider the initiation phase in the context of our cake baking analogy. When you decide to bake a cake, you must first choose the type of cake you want to make. Are you aiming for a classic vanilla sponge or feeling adventurous with a triple-layered chocolate fudge cake? This decision essentially sets the stage for everything that follows, from the ingredients you'll need to the baking time. Similarly, the initiation phase in project management is all about defining your project. It's the stage where you decide what you want to achieve, why you want to achieve it, and how you plan to do so. Just as you can't bake a cake without knowing what kind you're making, you can't manage a project without knowing what you're aiming to accomplish. Moreover, the initiation phase involves identifying your stakeholders, or the people who have an interest in your project. These could be your team members, customers, or management, anyone who will be affected by the project's outcome. Just as you'd need to consider who you're baking the cake for, a birthday party, a wedding, or just a casual Sunday dessert, you need to identify and understand your stakeholders' expectations in a project. In the same way that you'd gather your ingredients before starting to bake, the initiation phase is about gathering all the necessary information and resources to kickstart your project. It sets the foundation for your project, just as the right recipe does for your cake. So to sum it up, in project management, the initiation phase is where we decide what kind of cake we're making and gather our ingredients. It's the crucial first step that sets the tone for the entire project, and just like in baking, it's essential to get it right. The initiation phase is like deciding what type of cake you want to bake. It's the first and arguably the most crucial stage in project management, where we set the stage for the rest of the project. Here, we're defining what our project is and what it's not, much like deciding whether we're baking a chocolate cake or a strawberry one. The initiation phase is composed of three key components: defining the purpose, determining the scope, and setting the objectives. First, we define the purpose. Why are we baking a cake? Similarly, in a project, we need to understand why we're undertaking it. Next, we determine the scope, deciding on the type, size, and flavor of our cake, or in other words, the boundaries of our project. Lastly, we set the objectives, laying out the recipe for our cake, providing a roadmap for our project. Let's break it down step by step. First, you need to define the purpose of your project. Think about it this way. You wouldn't enter your kitchen, roll up your sleeves, and start mixing ingredients without knowing what you're going to bake, would you? Of course not. You'd have a clear idea in your mind. Today, I'm baking a cake. Similarly, in project management, having a clear purpose is crucial. The purpose is the driving force of your project. It's the reason why you're embarking on this journey. It's the why behind all the whats. Just as baking a cake is the purpose in our analogy, in real-world project management, it could be anything from developing a new software application to launching a marketing campaign. The purpose gives direction to your project. It acts as a compass, guiding your team through the project journey. Without a clearly defined purpose, your project could drift aimlessly, like a ship without a rudder. A well-defined purpose ensures that every action, every decision, and every effort is aligned with your project's goal. A clear purpose also inspires your team. It gives them a reason to invest their time, energy, and talent in the project. It helps them understand the significance of their work, boosting their motivation and productivity. Moreover, the purpose is the foundation of your project plan. It's the starting point from which everything else flows. It helps you determine the scope, set objectives, allocate resources, and plan your schedule. So how do you define your project's purpose? Start by asking yourself some key questions. What problem are we trying to solve? What opportunity are we trying to seize? What value are we trying to deliver? The answers to these questions will help you articulate your project's purpose. But remember, the purpose is not just about what you're doing. It's also about why you're doing it. It's about the impact you're aiming to create, the difference you're striving to make, the benefits you're hoping to deliver. In short, defining the purpose is like setting your project's destination. It's deciding where you want to go before you start your journey. So, take your time. Be thoughtful. Be strategic. You need to be crystal clear about why you're doing it. Next, determine the scope. Just as you would decide the flavor, size, and decorations of your cake, so too must you define the scope of your project. The scope is all about setting the boundaries of your project. It's about answering the question, what is included in your project and what isn't? To illustrate, let's go back to our cake analogy. Are you baking a 6-inch chocolate cake for a small family gathering? Or are you creating a multi-tiered vanilla extravaganza for a grand wedding? The scope of your project would be vastly different in each case, wouldn't it? This is precisely why defining the scope is such an essential step in the initiation phase of project management. The scope of a project includes not just the final product or service, but also the work required to deliver it. It defines the breadth and depth of your project. Are you responsible for baking the cake from scratch, or are you merely responsible for decorating a pre-baked cake? Are you expected to deliver the cake, or will someone pick it up? The answers to these questions determine the scope of your project. Defining the scope of a project isn't just about understanding the extent of your work, however. It's also about setting expectations, both for yourself and for your stakeholders. When you have a clearly defined scope, it's easier to manage expectations, allocate resources, and avoid scope creep. The term we use when a project's requirements start to extend beyond its original objectives. So, as you embark on your project, take the time to clearly define its scope. Understand the exact nature of your project, the work it entails, and the expectations associated with it. Remember, the scope of your project is like the recipe for your cake. It's your guide, and having a clear, well-defined guide will make the process of executing your project that much smoother. To sum it up, defining the scope is like choosing the flavor, size, and decorations for your cake. It's about setting boundaries and managing expectations. It's about understanding the work involved and the resources required. And most importantly, it's about ensuring that your project delivers on its intended outcomes. It's essential to set realistic expectations. Finally, set specific objectives. This step is the heart of the initiation phase and is much like deciding what you want your cake to taste and look like. In the context of our cake analogy, are we aiming for a rich, chocolatey experience with a creamy, mouth-watering frosting? Or perhaps we're crafting an airy vanilla sponge cake with a tart, fruity filling. Just as these decisions guide our baking process, so do objectives steer the direction of our project. Setting objectives is a crucial part of project management. These objectives guide your project, providing a clear path towards your end goal. They give you a clear understanding of what you are working towards, allowing you to measure your progress and adjust your strategies as needed. Now you may be wondering, what makes a good objective? Well, in project management, we use the acronym SMART to define quality objectives. But what does SMART mean? Let's break it down. S stands for specific. Your objectives need to be clear and well-defined. Ambiguity is the enemy here. For instance, instead of saying we want to bake a good cake, we specify we want to bake a moist, flavorful chocolate cake. M stands for measurable. How will you know when you've achieved your objective? There needs to be some sort of metric to gauge your progress. In our baking scenario, this could be the taste test. If our cake satisfies the taste buds, we've hit our mark. A is for achievable. It's essential to set objectives that are within your capacity to reach. If you're a novice baker, it's probably not a good idea to set out to make the most elaborate 5-tiered wedding cake on your first go. R stands for relevant. Your objectives should align with your overall goal. If we're baking a cake, an objective focused on perfecting a pie crust isn't going to help us. Finally, T stands for time-bound. Every objective should have a deadline. This creates a sense of urgency and keeps the project moving forward. So in conclusion, objectives in project management should be SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Now that we've defined our cake, let's talk about stakeholders. Just as every ingredient contributes to the final cake, stakeholders are crucial contributors to any project's success. In project management, stakeholders can be individuals, groups, or organizations who have a vested interest in the project. They could be directly involved in the work, or they could be affected by the project's outcome. A stakeholder could be anyone from a team member who is working on the project, to a manager whose department's work might be influenced by the project, or even the end customer who will use the product or service the project produces. Each stakeholder has unique needs, expectations, and concerns about the project. Just as you would consider the taste preferences of the people you're baking the cake for, you should understand what your stakeholders want and need from your project. For instance, your team members might care about the project's timeline because it affects their work schedules. Your manager might be interested in the project's cost because it impacts the department's budget. And your customers? They're likely most interested in the quality and functionality of the final product. Identifying your project's stakeholders is a critical step in the initiation phase. It's like making a list of all the ingredients you need for your cake. You wouldn't want to forget the sugar or the eggs, would you? Similarly, forgetting to consider a key stakeholder could lead to missed expectations, unforeseen challenges, and even project failure. So how do you identify stakeholders? Start by looking at who is directly involved in the project, who is affected by it, and who has influence or power over it. Consider the potential impact of the project on different people and groups. And remember, stakeholders aren't just people inside your organization. They can also be external, like suppliers, investors, or regulatory bodies. In conclusion, stakeholders are the critical ingredients of your project. They have the power to influence the project's success, so it's crucial to identify them early on, understand their needs and expectations, and plan how to engage them throughout the project. Identify who has an interest in your project and how it affects them. To manage stakeholders effectively, conduct a stakeholder analysis. Stakeholder analysis is a process that helps you understand who your stakeholders are, what their interests and expectations might be, and how they can influence your project. Think of it as a recipe for success. Just as you would carefully select and measure your ingredients when baking a cake, a stakeholder analysis helps you understand the different ingredients or stakeholders that play a crucial role in your project. Let's break down this process into 4 steps. First, identify your stakeholders. These are all the people who have a vested interest in the outcome of your project. They could be your team members, customers, suppliers, or even competitors. Just as you wouldn't want to forget any ingredient in your cake, make sure you don't leave out any key stakeholders. Next, categorize your stakeholders. Not all stakeholders are created equal. Some might have a significant impact on your project, while others might be nice to have. For instance, in our baking example, flour and eggs are essential, while decorations like sprinkles are optional. Categorize your stakeholders based on their level of influence and interest in your project. The third step is to understand your stakeholders. Now this is where the real cooking begins. Just as you'd need to know how each ingredient affects your cake, you need to understand what each stakeholder wants from your project and how they might react to different situations. Are they supportive or resistant? What are their expectations? The more you know about your stakeholders, the better you can manage them. Finally, develop a stakeholder engagement strategy. Just as you'd have a baking plan for your cake, you need a plan for engaging with your stakeholders. This could involve regular updates, meetings, and feedback sessions. Your engagement strategy should be tailored to the needs and expectations of each stakeholder group. Now that you've conducted your stakeholder analysis, you're ready to move forward with your project. You've identified who's involved, categorized them based on their level of influence and interest, understood their expectations, and developed a strategy for engaging with them. Just like having a well-organized recipe, this analysis provides a clear roadmap for managing your stakeholders effectively. Remember, just as a cake wouldn't be complete without all its ingredients, a project wouldn't be successful without effectively managing its stakeholders. So, take the time to conduct a thorough stakeholder analysis. It might seem like a lot of work, but it's worth it in the end. Remember, stakeholder analysis is a crucial step in ensuring the success of your project. It helps you understand the ingredients you're working with, their expectations, and how to best engage with them. So don't skip this step. After all, you wouldn't bake a cake without a recipe, would you? Happy baking and even happier project managing. We've covered a lot today, from understanding the initiation phase to identifying stakeholders. We kicked off by defining the purpose of our project, just like deciding to bake a cake, be it building a website or launching a new product. Then we determined the scope, setting the boundaries and expectations, just like choosing the flavor, size, and decorations of our cake. And we set SMART objectives, deciding what we want our project to achieve, much like choosing the taste and appearance of our cake. We also took a moment to understand the importance of stakeholders, the people who have an interest in our project, comparing them to the ingredients needed to bake a cake. We learned that a stakeholder analysis is key to managing their expectations effectively. Stay tuned for our next video, where we'll delve into the next phase of project management. Until then, keep learning and keep growing.